I'll tell a few words about ourselves. Culture 2.0 is a special project organized by the St. Petersburg International Cultural Forum that carries events all year round. We organize events dedicated to culture in a broader sense of this word, how to work with the audience, how robots can help you in the work you do, also how to attract teenagers to libraries or museums. And today we wanted to talk about how to research and study the museum audience. First, we'd like to thank all of you for joining us today for this event. We also have Yelena Maya. She hosted us here, and the welcome was a very warm one. Can you please bring you on the stage for a couple of words? Good afternoon, dear colleagues. And the mic is off. Sorry. No. And we're very thankful to everyone who managed to join us online. You all understand how important it is to be able to learn and to learn continuously, because the modern day and age that changes so fast doesn't allow us to sit back and relax. That's why here in Tyumen, in the field of culture, at our ministry, we pay a lot of attention to an educational process. And you might remember that in the beginning of April, we've hosted a big international educational forum. We call it 4K of Culture. And during 3 days, we've been developing projects, building them up, and we mapped our cultural projects, put them on the roadmap, and some of them are currently being implemented in some of our municipalities. Now, to continue this topic, we are organizing yet another event, for which I'm extremely thankful to the organizers. Thanks for offering us the initiative and giving us an opportunity to conduct an open lecture event, Culture 2.0, under the auspices of the International Cultural Forum of St. Pete. This venue, throughout the year, has been traveling from regions to regions. And this venue has become a forum where a live dialogue is being conducted, where new ideas are being born, where trends are being discussed. Today, colleagues, we have a unique opportunity to ask questions, and I call on you to ask questions. We really want this constant dialogue, a never-ending one. Ask questions, speak out, speak up. Even if you think that something is off topic, but it itches, it pains you, please do let them out. Our experts, our colleagues here will answer you, at least they will guide you in the right direction. And today, we are announcing the 2-day session. We will have 4 sessions all in all. And today we will all be talking about museums. And I'm happy to see so many employees of one of our leading institutions in this field, Tyumen community of museum workers. So colleagues, this day is for you. Please ask questions. And I'm happy to welcome all the colleagues and speakers. Here we've got representatives from Garage Museum of Contemporary Art. We've already talked and we will continue conversing. We also have the State Museum of Art named after Pushkin, and we also have here Moscow Pedagogical University. The educational institutions are being represented, so the forum topic is so diverse, and I would like to wish all of us a very productive work, and I would like to thank all of you for the interest you've shown. And of course, I do hope that what sticks in the memory of all people who came to us is the Tyumen Krai, the Tyumen region, and it will stay as a hospitable region and a warm one. Thank you. Thank you so very much for the welcome address. Today we've got not a very simple topic to discuss. As you know, massive public is a confirmation of the fact that museum is one of the most democratic institutions out there. Because as opposed to other cultural institutions, a visitor of a museum is free to choose which item to stop by, which item to pass, which exhibit to pass. And that makes your work so much more difficult, because to predict, to preempt how a visitor will behave is really hard. Starting from the time immemorial when the museums started during the French Revolution. The museum was not a central actor in this field. Only recently, we've been started thinking about how to make sure that the visitor interacts with the museum and the museum interacts with the visitor. In 1926, in St. Petersburg, where Cultural Forum was born, a Institute of Art History was established, and there was a lecture delivered, a lecture by an employee of the Russian Museum about how to research a museum visitor. He said, and I quote, "It has to become a central piece of every museum work. But after that, unfortunately, there's been not so many research around it, and it remained just one lecture in the ocean of other papers. But today we will try to go back to that. Here we have Irina Erisanova, head of the Pasternak House Museum, the State Museum of the History of Russian Literature; Yegor Sanin, head of the Audience Department, Garage Museum of Contemporary Art, Russia; Varvara Korneyeva, head of Visitor Experience, Garage Museum of Contemporary Art, Russia; and we will see her now on the screen, Kristina Lista, marketing consultant, trainer and facilitator, co-director of the museum freelance. Hello, Kristina. Kristina helps out various organizations to define their audience and to understand how to grasp the audience's attention. And there's a question that I would like to address to her, the first one. How do you help museums? And how museums start using technologies, and how do they research their audiences?
Spasiba and dobre diem, good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to be here with you today. I have some slides I will share so I can do a bit of an introduction to the work I do with audiences. Yes, so thank you very much for the introduction. I think really what audience research is about curiosity and wanting to really understand more about audiences. So I just have a few minutes of introduction where I'm going to share some of the work I do, both with organisations that are big, so for example, the Science Museum Group and Museum of London, and to some smaller organisations that are independent, such as the Museum of Cambridge and Jane Austen's House Museum. So really, for me, it starts with identifying who our current audiences and visitors are. So their demographics, their age, where they live, that sort of thing, their visitor patterns and behaviours, their motivations, so why they come, their likes, their dislikes, what they expect of a visit, and also their satisfaction levels. And then the next step is comparing that data to other local community data on who lives in the area, tourist data, data from other museums, and benchmarking data to identify who's not coming. So again, looking at audiences that are potential audiences but currently not visiting, their demographics, what they like, they dislike, their expectations, but really crucially, I think, their barriers to visiting, their barriers to engagement, why they currently aren't coming, and splitting that up into two streams, really, things that we can't do anything about. So perhaps people tell us they're not coming because they're busy, or currently international tourists aren't coming because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But then really drilling down and trying to understand things that we can do to encourage new visitors to our venues. So looking at our marketing, our communications channels that we use, the messaging we put out, our programming, so what events and exhibitions we put on, our pricing, our operations, even things like our opening hours, so how we can become more relevant to more people. I'm also really interested in delving into audience journey mapping, so really thinking holistically from the start when someone's not aware that our organisation or our venue exists, and moving them along to considering a visit, actually making the decision to come and visit and attend, the visit experience itself, and then hopefully encouraging them to become repeat visitors, perhaps to volunteer with us, perhaps to donate, and to tell other people about our venue. So doing research to really understand all the steps in this process, identify opportunities for us, and also identify some challenges. So in terms of the type of research and consultation work I do, and also that are popular in the United Kingdom where I'm based, obviously there's things like looking at booking data, ticket sales, also website and social media analytics can be really useful. Doing classical visitor surveys, visitor observation can be really useful too, focus groups and interviews, also more interactive and sort of fun, engaging things, whether that's touch screens or feedback walls and voting boxes and things like that. Also, there's a lot of sector support organisations in the UK that provide benchmarking data and data on the whole country's cultural and heritage sort of patterns and behaviours and attitudes, which is really useful to look at. So over the past year, audience research has really had to adapt because of the pandemic, and our audiences have also changed and been impacted as a result. So some audience research methods have had to change, for example, switching in-person focus groups to online or virtual focus groups. Much of my work over the past year has really involved working with audiences to understand the impact of the pandemic on their audiences and their visitors, and how they maybe should be adjusting as a result. Each museum's experience is obviously very unique. There have been challenges, obviously a drop in visitor numbers, but also some real opportunities for online engagement and digital engagement that really is helping a lot of museums to reach audiences much further afield, audiences that perhaps will never be able to visit them in person. So just finally then, I wanted to finish with a few questions that I'm exploring with museums at the moment, which I find really interesting. So which of the new audience behaviours we're seeing as a result of COVID-19 will stay, and which will ultimately go back to where they were before the pandemic? Are there COVID measures and adjustments that we're currently doing that actually audiences will value in the long term as well? Have some audiences, perhaps some of our really loyal visitors, got out of the habit of visiting over the last year, and what can we do to encourage them back? Can we convert some of the new digital and online audiences into in-person visitors perhaps? And will people still want online engagement beyond the COVID pandemic? And if so, who and what will they want, and when and in what form? So ultimately, these are all questions that it's part of an ongoing exploration, and really just part of all the questions, part of ongoing work that we do to help really understand and serve our audiences and communities.
Christina, thank you so very much. Now I'd like to build a bridge, and I'd like to go to Garage Museum, because Christina is an independent consultant. But in the Garage Museum, you have a separate department that does audience surveys. Can you please explain us how your work is being structured? How do you distribute the functions in between yourself? Or have you ever had, you always had these independent employees who were researching the audience? Thanks very much, Eliona. Can you hear me, colleagues? Can I please push it closer to me? Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Igor Sanin. I'm the head of the audience department at the Garage Museum. Actually, the structural department that does audience research has always been around with Garage. Originally, we were doing visitor experience. Visitor experience is about the experience of a person who already arrived to us, who already came, who already visits. And Varya Korneyeva will tell you more about that. Also, this department has been looking at the potential audience, researching it, has been looking at the tourists. But talking about the framework of this particular meeting, audience research, until 2016, the Garage Museum hadn't been doing it internally. We've been inviting experts, we've been outsourcing that. Now we invited large sociological agencies to do wave research, to keep our finger on the pulse, to be in the know, to be aware of who our audience is. And we ran some significant and expansive quantitative research, sometimes 1,000, 2,000 respondents per wave. But again, by 2016, we came to realize how important it is to have an internal unit within those huge audience departments that would be doing research. And after this, we established our own research program. It is closely associated with our research process, internal research process, because we're sure that an audience research is not just a process that helps us to attract new people. It's a process that influences everything we do, all the projects and programs that we set up. And that's why, so often, especially in foreign institutions, similar departments that are responsible for the audience research are being called the advocates of the audience. Because they're the people who know what the audience wants, what the audience likes, what to do with them, and they can impact our own operations. And in this way, we can build their expectations horizon. I mean, the audience's expectation horizon. It's also a very useful financial tool, because when you know your audience, it impacts your P&L and it impacts your budgets and everything. But having an in-house unit like that, that does customer research or visitor research, doesn't necessarily mean that we don't go to external agencies. I think every institution that has their own employees or researchers clearly have to do this work, because you can't really keep your own sociological agency, but when needs be, you can refer to them. For example, if we want to do questioning and if we want to do some other tracking, that we can do by ourselves. So we really want to know the motivations of the people. But if we want to do something bigger, something more expensive, if we want to do big data analytics, here we trust the external specialists. Thank you. Thank you, Igor. May I add to that, please? Igor said that we refer to the private companies, the private institutions that do research under specific requests. For example, I'm responsible for designing visitor contacts, and I'm responsible for the most efficient, most pleasant, and most positive and inspiring contacts, so that people were inspired to visit our museum or any other museum. So what's important for us is to trace and track the quality of, I don't really want to say service, but yes, it is service. It's the interaction between the visitors and our employees. And for that, we refer to a special company that does a full-fledged and end-to-end research with mystery shoppers, a turnkey product, so to speak. Why we refer to them? Because we can't do it by ourselves. Well, because we're no longer mystery. Yeah, there's no mysteryness, exactly. And also, you see, we are so caring about our team. We love the people we nurture, we develop, we grow. So, there are some internal needs that we cannot satisfy in an in-house way. Since I grabbed the mic, can I please use this opportunity and tell what me and my department does? Like Igor said, in our museums there have always been people who work with the visitors, who sell their tickets, who hang their clothes in the wardrobe, who meet and greet them, etc., etc. At one point in time we realized then that the functions we do is of course important and necessary, but what's even more important for a cultural institution in the modern world is the quality of, again, sorry, service. However opposed we were to the fact that servicing, the quality of service, guys, how can you even talk about that? We're a modern contemporary art museum. It's not about us. We're not about service. But something else. But in the end of the day, we came to the conclusion that this HoReCa business, hotels, restaurants, catering, have long been sitting on the standards, service standards. And the way they communicate with their guests and visitors is on a top-notch level. And now the standards, they are covering and they are penetrating into our life, our general life. If you come to a coffee shop or a gym, you can't ignore the fact that the service levels are becoming even better with every passing moment. As for Tumi in the city, we came here yesterday, and for 2 days we are amazed about every person we meet in the city, especially during our short contacts with your hotel receptionists and coffee shop waiters. I think that in your city there's no problems with empathy, with this inbuilt hospitality. I think you're born with it, but the big cities are not like that. And that's why we need to train our people. We need to trace the qualities and the traits, and we need to make sure that they can carry this germ of good mood naturally and pass it on to each other. And research helps us in tracing that contamination, positive contamination. Thank you so much. Thank you. Now I'd like to ask a question to Irina Yeresanova. A literature museum, a museum that's a part of a huge complex. It's always a complex story. Your museum has a story, and your visitors are unique, your own. There's a misconception that the museum will always be patronized by the same people, that new audiences don't really like to come to museums. What's your take on your visitors, and how do you understand who's your visitor and who's not your visitor? Well, a hard question, because it requires a very big answer, and I don't really want to take all the time here at the mic. But I'm very happy about the success of the Garage Museum over here. Maybe the colleagues don't know about that, but we have our own garage in our museum. Did you know about that? You see, I'm starting my sociological research right away. Who comes to our museum? You see, you don't go to our museum. Our museum is not in the is not in the center of Moscow. It's outside Moscow. I'm in this small garage of ours at an interesting location called Peredelkino. We have a beautiful orchard that blossoms and even produces fruit, and we share the fruit. But it's not the fruit that lures people in. Of course, we do lots of field research, as opposed to what the colleagues here do, because we are part of a state institution. You need to buy our tickets through the cash register, and the tills are the machines that we use to register our attendance. And everything seems to be very simple, and the trend is pretty evident. The attendance is growing. What to do with that, we don't know, because having more people coming to our museums is a hard job, because we hadn't had so many people 8 years ago. 8 years ago, we were a very calm place. Sometimes we would even call this museum a sleeping beauty, to which, of course, people who love Boris Pasternak came, and we have lots of people who love Boris Pasternak. We had lots of foreign visitors as well, once in a time. Schoolboys and girls would be brought in, and sometimes people would just pass by and walk in. But we decided to change that. And we started everything with a list. You know, making a list is the first thing we do. So in this list, we put down the things that we're not going to do. We said that we're not going to service anyone, and we're not going to entertain. That's what we claimed right from the outset. Okay, if we're not there to service and to entertain, what are we there to do then? We said that we need to create a place where everybody will be extremely interested. Almost everyone is going to be extremely interested. Curious. Well, because there are just a couple of people that don't give a damn about everything they see, and they are excluded from the list. I'm sorry, I'm not the first person to use an example. May I please use this example right now? Everybody who used it before me, well, thanks a lot, but I will take it from you. Take Thomas Sawyer, the way he paints the fence. He was painting the fence in such an amazing way that in order to paint the fence, there's a queue that would buy the right with presents from Tom Sawyer, to do it for him. What can we do at the museum? Well, the core stayed intact. We are a literate museum, we're a literature museum, sorry, we're a location where Boris Pasternak used to live. We want to make our museum as democratic as possible. We're not putting any fences around, we're not thwarting people off, we're not saying keep off the grass, keep off the hands, whatever. We had to limit some of the interactions, but once we even wanted to hang out different things, like thanks a lot for not lying on Boris Pasternak's bed. That's what we said. We reformulated that, not saying keep off Boris Pasternak's bed, but thank you for not lying there. But then, after democratizing the museum, we started creating and running special exhibitions, not the usual ones, because we hadn't had conditions for the usual exhibitions. We had a very small room with not so much light, but we have a very nice panorama up on the top, close to the roof. It used to be a cold one, but we have refurbished it, and we started doing exhibitions, not just the simple ones. We wanted to do some exploration exhibitions, curiosity exhibitions. When you start exploring something, you don't really want to make it a mystery. You really want to bring in as many people as you want. Some of the bypasses, they stick around and they stay, and they become regular visitors of the museum while the time passes. We did it in a very informal way. We decided not to limit anyone from attending the museum, and I think that's the liveliest, that's the most attractive thing in a museum. And when it comes to the audience, we have lots of young people. You see, we have lots of youth, especially students. Actually, we partner a lot with the teachers as well, and we have long-term relations with lots of schools out there. So that's it. I'm sorry for taking so much time. I'm really afraid of taking so much time. I would like to ask a question to Garage colleagues. I've read recently that the average age of your visitor is 26 years. Those who don't come to you, the non-visitors, how do you track them? I think we have a favorite example here with Varya about the Territorial Center of Social Service. Somewhere back in 2016, 2017, we challenged ourselves to start attracting the audience that is being called different ways, like the third age, the silver age, 50+. I don't really like any of those definitions, but that's how they're being called. And we ran our research. Every time you want to attract a new audience, you have to hypothesize. You have a certain expectation period, and then you test your hypothesis, and the hypothesis will either be debunked, unfortunately, or will be sustained. And we realized that we thought our hypothesis was that Garage would not be interesting for this age group, but we still decided to try because it was important for us to try. That's our policy. Our policy is to be open for a very broad range of audiences. And we found an organization that's called Territorial Center for Social Service. In Moscow, I think they have 130 offices of it, distributed by districts. And we started contacting them, and we started sending them letters, we started phoning them. And after some time, gradually and slowly, they started bringing their patients to us. And 3 months after, they became a regular audience. And we even started free-of-charge tours for them. For example, if we announce a new exhibition season, we get 20 applications from various centers caring for elderly people. And quite often, these visitors, the elderly visitors from the social service organization, they then come to us on their own with their kids and grandkids, whom they tell about us, about Garage. So it's a beautiful experience for us because many of these people have never been to a contemporary art museum. Moreover, part of them have never been to a museum at all. And being the first museum that they've been to, It's, well, such a big thing for us. How often do you need to research your audience, and how often you do it? When it comes to the research, when it comes to studying the audiences, look, our whole research program that we work on can be divided into two big blocks. The first one, these are running questionnaires and surveys which we do offline. We have interviewers who just walk around the museum building or attend the events we organize, and they just talk to the visitors. They fill in an online form this way. The second type of questions or surveys we run is pertaining to projects. And here at Garage we have lots of projects and programs for which we have our unique audience, and we have key accounts or managers, if you wish, for these projects. And they can do, and they do their own objectives, they deliver their own objectives. We call this program surveys. For example, we have a survey on the cinema program we run, because we showcase our own movies. We have Garage Screen and Garage Cinema. We have a loyalty program, and our department curates it as well. We have a library. We have the first library in Russia about contemporary art, actually, and we run surveys on that, and etc., 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 as they say. Talking about the frequency, we do program surveys once a year, and it helps us to take stock of where we are. For example, if a cinema season comes to an end, if a screening season comes to an end, it happens in autumn, the beginning of winter, and we send our surveys to everyone who had once bought ticket with us. The loyalty card holders, well, here we have more leeway, and you can choose any date in the calendar, say May, and every May they will get our surveys. And when it comes to general questions, if we want to cover all of our audience, irrespective of the program they attended. As for the offline surveys, we do them in waves, so we attach them to each exhibition season. In the course of the first 2-3 months when the season opens, unfortunately not in 2020, of course, partially 2021 because there's been restrictions and coronavirus limitations, and we have interviewers who do that during that time. We also have a large survey by the end of the year, by the year end. We do a massive emailing, and we launch it on an annual basis, somewhere in December the 20th. It's a closing act to finalize the year. We're asking our visitors what did they like, what they didn't like in the last year, and we ask them to give a feedback, and then we would work with that feedback throughout the year. Now, talking about service stories, mystery shoppers, and customer experience, we do it in waves again. But here we have a different dynamics. When we want to assess the level of a service, we need to assess it using different indicators across different scenarios. For example, when all of our visitor experience are utilized 100%, when everything is fully packed, that's one type of survey. Or, which is also very important, when there are no visitors whatsoever. For example, how do you like the service when there's no visitors? In the beginning of the day, when it's more spacious in the building. And we want to know how our employees motivated during this time frame. Because quite often, the lack of activity, the lack of people demotivates our employees, as well as too much activity. If you have questions, colleagues, you can ask them, but please raise your hand so that we can pass on the mic. Also, we are broadcast, and our visitors can ask their questions, our viewers can ask questions under the broadcast. Can I ask you a question, Igor? Offline surveys, do you do them as exit polls, exiting the museum, or technically? How do you do that? What questions do you ask to the visitors? Talking about offline. Look, regarding the exit polls, here it's important to know the way our building is designed. Usually, when you come to the museum, the first thing you see, the first thing you face, it's the information desk, the cash register, and then your journey continues. Like, you imagine you carry a ticket and you go into an exhibition. In our case, architecturally, historically, it so happened that when you enter garage in Gorky Park in Moscow, you end up in a huge space called atrium, and the information board will be a next stage after that. We have a coefficient that we call exhibition coefficient, which never equals 100%. It's the amount of visitors who came and bought a ticket. What about the rest? It's important for us that there are people who don't buy tickets for our exhibitions. Why? Because Garage has lots of parallel programs. Our public lectures, public programs, we have atrium commissions. There's some works of art that are being exhibited in the atrium. There's also a cafeteria and the store. So we are not focused on a specific part of the customer journey. In this case, we're trying to catch, I'm sorry to use this word, people who are moving around the atrium, grab them, so to speak, and bring them to somewhere. For example, take them to an exhibition. Or if they enter an exhibition, we see that they go to the wardrobe right away. So during our research, we wanted to see how they're moving freely by their own volition. And we really want to make our institution service-friendly. You might have seen it somewhere when, for example, you are busy with your own errands, and the person with a questionnaire comes to you and says, "Can you please fill it in?" Or the guy with the electronic cigarettes comes to you and, "Do you smoke?" No, we don't really want that. We want to catch them in the time when they're free, when they're positive, and they are willing to answer questions. That's important. Also, when we run our surveys, we have standardized blocks of questions. All the social demographic data, age, name. Recently we started asking profit levels. Recently we thought that it was not ethical, but now the profit levels or the incomes, it's an important thing for us to know. Another important parameter that you have in every poll, in every survey, and actually we call all cultural institutions to collect it. It's the NPS, the Net Promoter Score. When you ask, would you recommend our institution to your colleagues, friends, and whatever? Are you ready to recommend from a 0 to 10 score? When 0 is not probable, 10 very probable. And the final score shows you, are you really, do you have a loyal audience? And how loyal they are. I'm really sorry for using commercial terms, but that's a brand loyalty, guys. And this indicator works really well, especially well when you can compare it with something for benchmarking. So we believe it's important, so we call everyone on using that. Also, we ask the frequency of the visits. What do you exactly come to see in the garage? Are those open questions, open-ended questions, or closed questions? No, we have a standard number of answers. You just need to tick the box. Of course, the frequency is an open-ended question because you can't really put it in within the parameters. We really want to know what the visitors come to see in the museum, which programs they like, they don't like. One of the most important questions is, why are you here today? And depending on the circumstances, we might add some other things, or commentary, or anything else. For example, now, in our recent surveys that we send out in the massive emailing list, we've been asking our visitors, how comfortable do you find the current safety measures regarding COVID? And the question was, do you think the measures are enough? Or do you think they're not enough? Or do you think they're excessive? They're too much. Also, when the museum was closed and we were sending out all our visitors the questionnaires, the forms, when we experienced lockdown, we asked them, a very rigid lockdown, we asked them, do you feel comfortable on the net? It was important for us to know that, well, you see, people were overwhelmed with Zoom and online space, and we needed to know, how can we help? can we be delicate and can we be mild in offering our own content? Colleagues, anyone in the room here who does regular polls of their audiences? Do you survey your audience? Can you raise your hand? By a show of hands, have a look who does that. Seems to be none. Okay, I'd like to ask a question to Christina then. What do you recommend to the museums in terms of how they should be doing their research and surveys with visitors? Any particular recommendations, any practices? What do you start off with?
I think it really depends on so many factors. So how big is the organisation? Do you have the skills and experience in-house within the organisation to do that yourself? Do you need to get some external help in, either a big agency or a consultant to deliver the work, or perhaps just help you with phrasing the questions? I mean, for me, the starting point is always who is the current audience, before then being able to identify, well, who's not coming, and how we might be able to attract them to grow our audiences. So who's currently coming, why they're coming, like the previous speaker said, motivations, likes and dislikes, always looking at how we can do things better. So a sort of visitor survey is the sort of standard good starting point, and if you do that regularly throughout the year, every year, the great thing about that is that you can then track and compare results across the years. And sometimes there'll be really interesting insights there which will help you improve. Sometimes there'll be some surprises. I've worked with de Havilland Aircraft Museum for a few years, and they have been doing visitor surveys since 2014. They reopened last summer for a short time, August to October, between 2 UK lockdowns. And it was really interesting because even though COVID restrictions was really the top criticism that came in the visitor survey, so the fact that you couldn't climb into the old aircraft like you used to be able to, overall, I think it was Eagle talking about the Net Promoter Score, overall visitor satisfaction levels were still higher than they had been a few years before, because people still appreciated so much the opportunity to come back to a safe space and see heritage and go to a museum, which they really long to do. So it is really interesting, I think, when you do things regularly and you can start to compare and track year on year. With the same museum, they took part in a group study, which is also something I really recommend when you partner up with other museums, perhaps other museums in your area, or it might be other museums that are similar type to yours, similar size, similar subject matter, for example, and you all use the same visitor survey, and therefore you can benchmark and compare with those other museums. So, for example, in this instance, the Havilland Aircraft Museum felt they were a family-friendly museum, had a lot to offer families with young children, but the percentage of their visitors who were children was quite low. If they compared that figure to the proportion of children living in the local community, it was fairly comparable. But what was interesting then is for them to be able to see that the rest of the group, the other 14 museums that took part, on average had twice as high a proportion of children as visitors as they did, so around 30%, whereas the Aircraft Museum had around 15%. This was back in 2014. So they thought, okay, there is clearly potential for us to be able to do more to attract more families and more children. So they set about doing some focus groups with some parents of children and testing things with children to really identify what they could do to attract more families. And that was really successful. Various things they did, changing opening hours, putting in activities in the school holidays and the summer holidays for children, doing some promotional activity, and also changing some of their marketing messages. So in images on their website and on their social media, making sure that children at the museum having a good time were also there in the images.
And now I'd like to ask Varvara, how do you get your survey results, and how do you put this into practice? How do you execute what Igor tells you to do? Igor brings you the paper. How do you communicate with the other departments? Are you a chef? Do you serve as a boss for people who help establish contacts with the visitors? Depending on the requests he brings, because the survey results can be used in programming, in marketing campaign, and of course it can be used in the visitor work. Sometimes the employees who work in the museum, who work in our visitor department, can serve as a source of knowledge that Igor uses in his analysis. What helps us most is not the data that we get from the social demographic. How do you call the block of questions? Yes, social demographic questions. No, we're mostly interested in reading the open questions, the mood thermometer. Igor has gave an example of a survey we ran during the pandemic, during the first lockdown in Moscow. There was an interesting block of questions there about psychology, the mood, the current feelings of the audience. And we asked them about their online behavior, what they do there, and what the visitor is expecting from museum as soon as the museum is open up. What safety and security measures, what kind of content, and where do visitors are itching to go as soon as it will be possible. So the research data prepares us for some trends. This is the way of probing the trends. This is the way of knowing what the society wants. And I would like to add to what Varvara said. Our department consists of two main areas, just two main businesses. The first one is visitor experience, that's what Vari is in charge of. And second one we call audience development. We're trying to translate it into Russian for a couple of years and we fail. Because audience development, well, it's not the right way to translate that, just purely developing the audience. What they do is they're trying to get in the know of the visitors, they're trying to learn what they're up to, what they want to, and inside this department, these two blocks, they go hand in glove and they cooperate intensely. Unfortunately, we couldn't bring in here the audience development boss who could speak together with Varya here because he couldn't travel, but it's important to always have a person who's responsible for just contacting the visitors and a person who's responsible for analytics. And between them, there can be a little bit of chemistry. I mean, there can be even a competition, if you want, opposition. It's like between marketing and sales. Same here, because both blocks have conflict points. You know, the salespeople always blame marketing for attracting wrong people. And they say, we can't convert them to consumers and brand loyal customers. The marketing says, we bring you massive amount of people. Why are you not selling it to them? But you also have museum curators. Can you come to them and say, this item, the visitors don't really like. Let's reposition it, or let's change it for something. We forget about the curators. We forget about an important component of every museum. Actually, talking about exhibitions, we work in a tight, we're like, we partner with the exhibition department very actively, even before an exhibition comes up, even before a project will be displayed. First, the exhibition guys come to us, and they want this space to be safe, to be comfortable for the visitors, and they want it to be clear in terms of navigation, in terms of signage, because, you know, we're also about signage. We're not only about visitor experience, but doing navigation and stuff. And, of course, they ask us to present some analytics. If we understand that there's a problem, that visitors don't react to something, or they react negatively, they give us a feedback, of course we can't but consider that, and of course we can't but communicate it to the curators. And depending on the situation, we can introduce changes if needs be, but here you need to understand about the following thing. There's one important balance that you need to sustain. I have a colleague of mine, Keith McSweeney. She worked in the British Museum, and she was a research director. And once she said a very useful thing during the webinar. She said that you never should ask the visitors what they want. Never. Because if you're going to ask them that, they want free drinks, roller coasters, and everything. So it's really important to know what people want, but you can't really implement that in your institutional activities, because talking about culture, you're still limited with certain things. And instead of that, what you should be asking them is, do you need any help? When you formulate your questions, you should position it within the current coordinate system, saying, guys, we're having a situation like that, where that, we can slightly move here, slightly move there. Help us, please, in adjusting or fixing our position within the current coordinate system. Only then will such formulation work. And the museum really needs a response, a feedback from the customer, from the visitor, because that's the core of our existence. That's what we are there for. Irina, may I ask you a question? We've got a question under the broadcast from Fyodor. Why does a museum need a new audience? And a question follows. Why do we need a museum? An amazing second question, a beautiful one. I think a museum is there to create an energy spot where one can reflect. I don't know whether I answered the question or not, because a museum is a joint reflection. It's an attempt to understand something, to comprehend and to solve. Since our museum, a house museum, has an additional energy component, because we have living objects, artifacts that used to belong to the real writer. Of course, it's a road to fetishism, but we are trying to stay away from that road. But the things that used to belong to someone, they hold a memory. And with this memory in these things, the energy point becomes even more vibrating. Now, coming to the first question, why do we need to attract new visitors? Actually, we don't really care who's going to come to us. Let me tell you, Frank. We don't really care whether these going to be students or an elderly citizen living nearby, a babushka, or just a bypasser or a woman who accidentally rode near on an inexpensive car and then, for example, decided to knock on our door and asks herself a question, who is Boris Pasternak, or whether it's a toddler who came with a mama and a dad. We are welcoming to everyone, and we need to account for everyone. There are future visitors, there are current visitors, there are established visitors and mature visitors. So we're there for everyone, because they serve to the benefit of the energy spot. They heat up the energy spot, they bring in their own energies to us. Actually, we still need to reflect on that. I'm thinking while I talk, but the research of our audience, the surveys that Igor has been talking about, in our business, I don't really understand that. I mean, in this literature museum of ours, I don't really know why we should be doing this. I think the venues we have are different. Well, call it startups if you wish. Our museum, it's a special one because there's a personality behind it, and this personality makes up the reputation. You came to the museum because you've heard about Boris Pasternak and you come to see where he lived. We, the employees of the museum, have 1 minute, 2, 3 minutes, no more. Well, sometimes if a person decided to buy a tour and he comes to us as a tour, we have only 1 minute to convince him or her that he's in the right spot and he's in good hands. And you don't really have to jump out of your pants for that. You have to live your work. The museum has to be lively. It has to be really true, authentic, with its own identity, a living organism in a body. I decidedly not brought photos with me because it would have taken a lot of time me showing you to them, because all of them are beautiful and amazing, but you have an opportunity to see the photos. Open up our webpage, find us on Facebook, actually subscribe to our webpage, because we've been around for so many time. And you'll see the Pasternak Museum and its beauty on Facebook. We have pages of specific projects, for example, Hamlet poem project. Doing all that, we realized that different people from diverse backgrounds show interest towards us, young and old, tall and short. We might even receive an intellectual, a Russian intellectual, Mr. Kleiman, saying, "Amazing, what you're doing here is amazing." Or a student from a theater institution can come to us and say, "How can I help you?" And then produce a 20-minute performance that would work for several days or several months, attracting more visitors. That's the way we do it. It's those accidental clashes, those accidental contacts that help us to produce more for our audience, to deliver a better experience. Of course, it's a research, and of course, any research and planned research is important, but accidental things are even better, and I don't really find any use in the research. All right, Igor, Irina said that the museum is a living body, and in this last year, when all of you were online, the Garage was really active online. How did you survey your audience there online? And can you say that you've got some new people, thanks to your internet projects that you were hosting? Now, the audience surveys, here we had a number of important initiatives. During the isolation, the lockdown, we did a number of surveys. Like Christina said, and she was exactly right, that it's important to compare, to benchmark the audience using the same questions. For example, are you tired of Zoom? Are you tired of internet? Because for the last year and a half, we've been living with this Zoom fatigue. There's an IT company called Krok that helped us digitize our exhibition. They digitized our Triennale of the Russian contemporary and modern art, and it was a lifeline for us back then, because people could have seen the projects that were closed and didn't run for long. I think they opened up in the end of January. I think March, 15 or 16 of March, that's when the lockdown started in Russia. Yes, so they didn't last for long. And when people moved around the exhibition space, and the data we got from them online gave us enough data to work with. Now, talking about the new audience, it's a very hard question to answer, because we don't have a single answer to that. Can't really say these exact. During the quarantine, during the lockdown, the first one, and then during the second lockdown, I think from November to January in Moscow, there we asked a lot of questions about care and self-care. Recalling this time now, looking back, we also worked a lot with the employees as well, because this care is an important thing during the self-isolation. For example, when we got closed, all the garage loyalty card holders got an opportunity to freeze their cards for the entire period while we were down. Also, if you bought a card during the lockdown, you could get a preference, you can get a bonus for your visits afterwards. So that's a show of care. Also, throughout this time, we wanted to support our own employees, and we did it while we were down. All of our information desk guys, they were hit the hardest. Just imagine sitting on Zoom all the time, and these guys, the information desk guys, whose main objective was to talk to the real audience, they were sitting idle, and we've been thinking with Varya, what shall we do? How do we improve the situation? We decided to put them at the call center, and they were sitting at home and answering calls. Have you been receiving lots of phone calls? Yes. They've been in plenty of phone calls. At one point in time, well, we attached a CRM system to it, but we're still in the process of digital transformation, so the system was not always there. Also, we have an amazing program called Horizontal Business Trips. Can you talk about that? Yes, I can. Yes, with great pleasure. The program we call Horizontal Business Trips is there to remove the gap in the experience. Yeah, that's a literal translation of the experience gap of our back and front employees. Front employees are people who work directly with the with the visitors. Back office are people who are responsible for managerial tasks, for strategic thinking, and etc. We came up with the following idea. When the front office guys have free time due to various reasons, for example, while during the mobbing and demobbing, well, there's no exhibitions, or pandemic, or some other unexpected events, we give them a chance to get seconded, to get internship work in other departments so that they could grow professionally. So it's like a rotation program, so that they can learn not just the service work. And there is a reverse program for our back office guys, which is rarely useful, going to Gemba, as they say in Japanese, especially for advertising and PR, when back office employees go and take posts at the front office, at the front desk, and they communicate with the visitors. And in this case, they learn again, or sometimes they learn anew who is exactly the person, the visitor they work with. And actually, this back rotation is more in demand than the front rotation. Everyone who works in the back office, they really want to go and try their experience at the front office desk, at the information desk. Me and Varya, we always like going down to the fields and talking to the audience. I'm sorry for answering the question so long and so messy, but yeah, we had new visitors because the museum had completely gone online, but the time when we were closed down, when the physical space was closed, what we were doing is we were trying to preserve, to nurture, to support and care. So we were just, it's not just a cold stacking, yeah, it's something that we wanted to use as an opportunity to preserve the contacts we've established. There's a question to Irina again. The generation of the 21st century, how will museums work with them? I think it's referring back to your phrase that you don't care who comes to your museum, a toddler or a senior person, but definitely there are differences, and that's why we want to survey our audience. We want to know who is our visitor. How does your museum does that? Well, look again. If we assume, and of course we're hospitable hosts, we assume that the guests come to us not just because they came to be there, they just bumped into us. No, they come for a reason. And imagine parents bring in a toddler, right? I don't know how we do this, but we want to take the toddler into account. We want to include him. We're not like running around the toddler. We're not talking in their own gibberish language. No, we are just being more welcoming. We switch on this positivity, and accounting for the toddler makes the parents happier. Because to a certain extent and degree, when they come to a toddler, they came to us because there's no other way for them. They can't leave him or her anywhere, and they wanted to come to the museum, and they can't leave the toddler behind. So what do we do there? What do we do with that? That's a question that we need to answer, and that's an interesting challenge for us. But a toddler, well, let me tell you, he is not the biggest challenge in the museum, because there are people who come to museums who know for sure the way you should work. Let me tell you how the museum should be run. Let me tell you, can I talk to the manager, please? They say, well, you're not the good curator, can I talk to another one? Well, this is a harder audience to account for, but we can also do them. We can also do them. You need to be open for everyone, for every challenge that may be out there. Nothing, well, not everything should be comfortable in the museum, even for the guys who work in it. There has to be a challenge. There has to be a difficulty, because this difficulty translates into another energy. For example, this energy can translate again to a creative challenge, and the creative challenge is something that we can work easily. I can't really explain to you how it works. I don't have an answer to you. Maybe we should ask Christina about that. Well, different visitors have different motivations to come to a museum. They have a different answer to the question why. How do you come up with a motivation for people who haven't been there yet, who are not visitors yet? Maybe there are any recommendations, Christina?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because maybe 20 years ago, the assumption was always that museums should promote their objects and their collections, and that is why, or their buildings, and that is the reason why audiences would visit. Whereas actually, some people perhaps don't really care so much about the objects. They're there for a social experience. They want to meet friends, perhaps just entertain or stimulate the children. Some are to take school children. Sometimes I know there are some free museums in the UK that are on the high street. And actually they say people just run in on a rainy day for 20 minutes because it's free and they're waiting for the bus and it's raining. So, it can be all sorts of things like that. And I think that's where marketing messages really comes in if you're trying to appeal to a broad range of people. So really picking up on, yes, we have something for people who are passionately interested in particular objects or times of history and really want to delve into those subjects really deeply, but also we're very welcoming and inclusive for people who want a different kind of experience. I think it's interesting just picking up on what Igor was saying about not just asking audiences what they want, because you really have to set some form of parameters there, because otherwise, you're restricted with your budgets, you're restricted with perhaps a historic building, with what you can do. And audiences don't always know what they want. My husband's an automotive engineer, and his example is always that if you'd asked people what they wanted from new cars many years ago, no member of the public, no car driver would have suggested like automatic windscreen wipers that adjust, that come on automatically and adjust with their frequency depending on how heavy the rain is. That's just probably not something that you would have thought of as a car driver, but that is a really useful innovation. So I think with any research, setting up some parameters can be really useful. Testing prototypes is something that's really useful if you're doing a new exhibition or a redevelopment. So, you might have ideas, the curatorial team, the interpretation team might have ideas, and putting them out there, whether it can be displays on the walls that people feed back on, asking people in surveys, doing focus groups, even quick polls on social media can be really useful as well.
Christina, and still, to get good quality data, it's better to use different methods, right? Different ways and tools of polling and questioning the audience. What do you recommend? What are the easier methods that you can combine with each other?
I think a standard visitor survey is a really good starting point, because without knowing who's coming and why they're coming, that is the starting point. What can be quite interesting then is, so that tends to be quantitative method. And like some of the speakers have said, visitors are busy, they haven't got time to type in on a screen or write reams and reams of information. So having multiple choice answers, people can quickly tick, perhaps give an option to also explain further if there's space. But there are limits with the quantitative data, that doesn't tend to answer the whys, the questions. So that's when things like doing interviews or focus groups can be really interesting, and you can really probe some of the things. So if you take the survey as the starting point, you can then probe some of the findings that maybe came out in the survey with a smaller group of people and go into much greater depth with them. So that can be really useful as well. When it comes to trying to attract new audiences, one of the things I think is really important to remember if you're trying to research with people who are not currently visiting you, they have no real vested interest in your organization. You know, they're busy people. There's a lot of competition for their time, for their money, their attention, their support. So, you know, why should they take part in your survey? Why should they give up their time to take part in a focus group? So certainly in the UK, it tends to be standard to incentivize people to do that, especially non-visitors and non-users. So in the form of a gift voucher or paying them, because otherwise, you know, chances are you'll just get people who already know about and like your museum to answer. And if you really want to get to those people who haven't heard of you and don't really currently care about you, you need to really make it easy for them and incentivize them to do that.
Christina, internet allowed some museums to become more democratic and expand their audiences. How do you do internet research?
Well, there's a lot of data you can get for free, certainly for smaller museums. If their website has Google Analytics enabled, you know, that and social media analytics that are embedded into social media channels can be a useful starting point, because that gives you an indication of age and gender and quite importantly, where people are based as well. And then it just depends what else you want to know about your audiences. So I know a lot of museums that have been doing online events the last year, things like curatorial talks, family craft activities and workshops, for example, online exhibitions, training, all sorts of things like that. You can then also attach an online survey at the end of the event as well and encourage people to take part in that. One of the things that we're discussing quite a lot now is actually the issue of digital exclusion. Because surprisingly, actually, there's a huge number of people in the UK who are not digitally, well, online really. And the three main reasons for that are a lack of access to devices, so a laptop, a desktop, or an iPad or a phone, and or data, so mobile or Wi-Fi, lack of skills to be able to use the internet and navigate your way around there safely and do what you want to, or just a lack of interest and confidence. So I think a lot of museums have gone to a digital first or a digital by default option the last year for marketing, certainly, and with a lot of online programming. But there is also an awareness that we still need to remember that a lot of audiences aren't online. And like Igor's mentioned, even those who are online are now feeling a lot more Zoom fatigue than they were. So certainly in terms of engagement figures, they tended to be a lot higher in the first lockdown for us last year, sort of April to June, than they have been this year. I have no data on this, but for me, I speculate whether it might become a seasonal thing, that actually online engagement and programming will be more popular in the winter months when, you know, the days are shorter, it's darker and it's colder, and certainly some older people perhaps less keen to go out in the evenings, whereas in the summer months, perhaps there won't be such an appetite for online engagement and programming.
Thank you. Maybe anyone has got questions from the audience? Irina, can you tell about your museum regarding the seasonality? Do you have a clear seasonality in your museum? And also talk about the schoolboys and girls, because that also is that impacts the amount of visitors in your museum. No, it's less than we used to have before. Dr. Zhivago is no longer a school program part. Yeah, it's no longer a compulsory book to read in the school program by Pasternak. But the quality of schoolboys and girls is amazing. I mean, who come to us, they're smart. Summer is the most busy month for us. Tomorrow I'm going to go to work right away. as soon as I leave Tumen, we have a huge territory, a huge compound. When you open up the gates, from the gates, when you walk towards the mansion, yeah, the whole territory is covered with a queue. There's a queue lining up in front of the mansion. And of course, we had to limit the amount of visitors. Our rooms are small, and we can't take more than 7 people per mansion, per visit, and we have to wait. But this is a problem that I think we tackled easily. You see, we made a flow. It's like a quick passage. The radio gate, the audio gate, we have got a radio. In each room, you have a radio that speaks. It's not something that you take. It's the radio that speaks in every room. And it's a quick one. And there are no tour guides. You just go from one room to the other in an IKEA-like way, and it works really well. As for the other seasons, you see, we see a mysterious pattern. Yeah, when it's rainy, people don't really want to go outside. They don't really want to go to the suburbs. When it's freezing and sunny, people like to come to us. Winter is not a dead season for us. Of course, we're not as active as in summer. In summertime, when it's hot, of course, we have the most active audience. And of course, you have to know that people really like to get away from Moscow, to have an escape. To Gorky Park or to Peredelkino, the place where we are. I like walking with my grandkid in Gorky Park when the time allows. It's a beautiful place. Everyone should visit it. And I think I answered your question, right? And that's the seasonality thing. Igor, have you had any surveys, the outcomes of which surprised you, caught you unawares? You were expecting something differently, and you had to reconsider your plans. Actually, all of them are like that, surprising us in the end. Because we always need to test a hypothesis, right? So you've got an expectation, you think it's like that, you have a hypothesis, you need to test it, especially if you need to test some technical equipment. For example, you need to know the occupancy of an exhibition, you need to know the flow direction, or whether your navigation works, tracking and things like that. One of the biggest shocks we had recently, in the last couple of years, is the survey we conducted on our concert program. We have our own concert program, if you didn't know. Because of 2020, of course, because of COVID, it was not hosted. We call it Mosaic Music. You know, we have a mosaic called Autumn in our building. It's a beautiful mosaic, which has been restored before the opening of the building in 2015. And next to it, we put a stage where interesting musicians and different artists can perform. And we thought back then, before the survey, that the main audience we have are people who go to concerts. People that don't really know anything about the museum. They are concert goers, mostly. You need to understand that these events have to be marketed through different channels. You buy a concert ticket. You don't really buy a concert ticket at the museum website. If you want to listen to a particular artist, right? You go to a specific ticket sale website. You're going to go to parterre.ru, the usual website, your usual suspect when it comes to searching for concert tickets. We thought that that's the way they buy it. That was our hypothesis, and the survey result shocked us, because half of the people at the concert were our museum visitors, our museum goers, those who went to us before. So they treat this musical program as just a part of the curated exhibition, which is amazing, I believe. Because in this way, we know that the programs we host, well, are very different. We can have not just the exhibitions, we can do more education, we can have garage light, concerts, everything. So I can't really list everything that we have to offer. And it seems like we are catering for all user needs. And I think it's important to know that the audience travels between the programs. And that was one of the biggest shocks we realized, that there is a clear connection. It means that you are trusted. Yes, we have a loyal audience. Trust is an important thing, for sure. We must have it. In a museum, definitely. And I think the most important thing here during this discussion is that visitors is one of the key currency of every cultural institution. And if you've got your audience trust, it means that the visitor comes to you, get the core audience, the loyal one. And our department also is in charge with a loyalty program. We don't call it a loyalty program, but it's the loyalty program. And what it does, apart from the financial things and apart from the support it renders to the museum, it's an opportunity to get in touch with the core audience of Garage. A global opportunity to contact with them. When you run your surveys, when you do your kids program surveys, do you ask parents or kids? Actually, it depends. It depends on who we want to get, who we want to attract. For example, we have our own children educational courses. They're not always children. We have an adult version, which is 18 plus, and we also have a family version of these courses when parents come with kids. So here you just need to realize that it's really hard to survey kids. That's why the children's survey is not something we are very good at. We try to ask questions to those who are 18 plus. What's important in here is when you survey any children's audience, a parent is an important figure, because it's him or her who will take the kid to a museum, to the event. And since today our museums are trying to ensure that a broad experience is delivered, it's important to get parents on board as well. So it depends on the situation, but mostly it's the parents who become our main communicator. Varvara, I'll ask you a question. If everything was ideal, if you could have done everything, what would you do to change in the museum? If you would have done a... Okay, so you're given a magic wand. You're a visitor of Garage. You want to change anything. What would you change in Garage? I think, are we outside pandemic? Do we... Yeah, this is wishful thinking, yes. This is something that we really want to change. Cancel the pandemic, if we can do that. When it comes to the visitor experience, I think there's lots of things I want to change. Well, for example, making a free entrance to the museum. If I was a visitor, it seems like there is a perception that any cultural entertainment has to be free of charge. I don't know. That's a hard question to answer. Irina, your opinion? An entry to the museum, has it to be free of charge? Of course it has to. Of course. But who cares what I think? Who cares? I think it should be this way. Of course, it would have been beautiful if everything was free of charge. But a museum is a very expensive institution. It's a great investment. A lot of money has to be spent on protecting what's in it. And it's a huge job, and no one will be ever sponsoring it free of charge. So the museum needs to be, I don't know, it has to participate in the overall accumulation of means, has its own budget. It doesn't mean that we are, I don't know, counting pennies, and you can't really call us thrifty. Every time a customer comes to us, a visitor comes to us, do you have any benefits? Can you use them? Like, are you within the age group that can use benefits? That's what we ask. We are not selling full-price tickets to everyone. Especially when students come to us from philology departments, they're free of charge. They can enter free, which is, I think, important for us. This is an audience, the public that we want. I'm risking turning into one of the protagonists of Chekhov's story, Mr. Semyonov, the writer, who always asks for money. I'm risking turning into that kind of guy. I'm not going to do it. But yes, money is something that we wanted to have, of course, because we have amazing plans for the future. We have an orchard that we want to support. We have our own garage, a small little one. It's a beautiful building, a beautiful asset. It's just in our territory. We do exhibitions there, but it doesn't fit. The facility doesn't fit. We need to invest just a tiny bit of money. And if we do that, we will get another awesome, amazing venue inside of Pasternak's building. That's it. That's it. Thank you, thank you. And I think that's a good note to finish. I wish everyone to get as many amazing museums to visit and as many amazing projects to show. And thanks a lot, dear colleagues and panelists. Take care and see you again. Bye-bye. Bye-bye for now.